Hello and welcome to Material Girls, a pop culture podcast that uses critical theory to understand the zeitgeist. I'm Hannah McGregor.
And I'm Marcelle Cosman. And today we are talking about 2004 sexy tearjerker, The Notebook. But before we dive into our topic, would you look at that? Oh my golly gee, we have a sexy guest. Vanessa Zoltan, pronouns she, her, is the CEO and founder of Not Sorry Productions, which produces the podcast that you know and love, Harry Potter and the Sacred Text, Hot and Bothered, and Let's Ask Taylor Swift. She is also an atheist chaplain and the author of the book Praying with Jane Eyre. Welcome, Vanessa.
One of the things I am proudest of is that our company also helped revive Witch Please. You guys were in a moment
You did.
That's
where
true.
you needed a production company, and I jumped on Hannah's tweet so fast. Hannah was like, we need some production help. I was like, me. And then you guys were Canadian, so we couldn't figure out how to pay you, and we had to send you goodbye.
Yeah.
It was complicated.
We do persevere in being Canadian.
And it was such a polite divorce. It was like, we love you, but we can't pay you. And you were like, we understand. It was like everyone was sad. It was
We all went to therapy.
divorce. Yeah.
It was great.
We're okay though.
Yeah. We are co-parenting this podcast with love.
And are not taking questions at this time. We want you to respect our
We would like
privacy.
you to respect our family's privacy.
The conscious uncoupling of 2002.
Yeah, we did consciously uncouple.
We did.
Wow.
We wrote a memo note on our phones and then posted that on Instagram. I can
That's
keep
right.
going.
Okay, listen. This is not the scripted small talk, Vanessa. Stop being charming.
I'm so sorry.
I thought we were here to talk about a sexy movie, but instead we're talking about a sexy working relationship.
Sexy only insofar as it is very respectful. Okay, listen, we are going to be talking about The Notebook, and we are going to be talking about weepies, which is actually a phrase I had never heard before.
And is a gross term. I don't hate a lot of the words that people hate, like moist and panties. I'm fine with it.
Oh, yeah.
Weepy really
Vanessa?
gets me grossed out. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, your moist, weepy panties.
Damn it. Okay, but wait, what happened to tearjerker? We used to call them tearjerkers.
Weepy predates tearjerker.
No.
It's an older term.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa. Mind
Yeah,
blown.
weepies are like 1950s sentimental movies.
Wow.
Melodramas, in fact, but we'll get to that later. Weepies are movies that make you cry, and I want to hear what movies make the two of you cry.
Have you guys seen Terms of Endearment?
Yes.
I have not.
So this is a weepy that I love so much. I lived in dorms for most of my 30s, and I had RAs who served under me, and one of them was this lovely man named Nick Barber, who we are still friends. He is 12 years younger than me. We have a shared affinity for this movie. We watch it together over Zoom or the phone every year now. We did this when we were together, and we try to not cry. And we can't do it. This is going to be our 10th year. We're going to do it soon. It is a great movie. People should see it. Shirley MacLaine, Jack Nicholson, Deborah Winger. It's based on a novel of the same name, and the author is an author I really love, Larry McMurtry. And there's a scene where a mom is saying goodbye to her kids because she's dying of cancer. And everyone is saying goodbye to each other. And there is a point at which she says to them, like, you're going to be mad at yourself for how you treated me, and I don't want you to do that. And I know. Anyway, I can't do it. I know it's going to come. I know. Anyway, so I've seen this movie at least 12 times now, and I've never not cried.
Yeah.
So it's parent-kid stuff that I'm like, done.
Parent-kid stuff.
Done.
Yeah.
Lady Bird, the end of Lady Bird, guts me.
Oh, haven't seen it.
Oh,
no
my
spoilers.
God.
It's on the list.
It's just like a beautiful parent-child moment.
It'll make you cry. I guarantee.
Yeah, I believe you.
Marcelle, what movie makes you cry?
A League of Their Own.
Oh,
Great.
which part?
Yeah.
Because sisters. No, when the woman finds out that her husband has died. Haven't seen that
Yeah.
without crying either.
Oh.
it's like women being empowered to do things by one another and like following their hearts and building friendships. And I won't say that every time I watch it, it makes me cry, but like it is a movie that like if I go to see it, I'm prepared.
I can hear the way that actress says George when she realizes it's her husband who's died in World War II.
Yeah, but you know what? George was an asshole.
You think so? Probably.
I think so because she was so afraid of what was going to happen to her when he found out that Jimmy ripped up his baseball card.
That's true.
What movie makes you cry, Hannah?
Oh, man. As it turns out, I mean, a lot. I'm a real weepy bitch. But Vanessa and I rewatched Titanic for Hot and Bothered, which I had not watched since it was in theaters because it made me cry so hard that I couldn't stop for like hours. And so I watched it and I had to watch the second half on fast forward. But I sobbed through.
Yes.
I sobbed through watching those dialogueless fast-forwarded scenes.
So to be clear, me too. And also, that gave me permission to fast-forward through some of the old people scenes in The Notebook.
Oh.
Because I was like, not this time. I now have a father with a degenerative brain disorder. And I was just like, no, sir. I'm not watching you misrepresent dementia.
Actually, no, thank you.
No, thanks.
Well, this sounds like a great segue. Let's move on to the next segment. What do you say?
Perfect.
Now, Vanessa, I know that you're one of our biggest fans, so you probably know this. But just in case we have some first-time listeners, I want to explain that our first segment, which is called Why This, Why Now, is the segment where we ask the materialist question, what are or were the historical, ideological, and material conditions for our object of study to become zeitgeisty?
So our object of study today is the 2004 movie The Notebook, directed by Nick Cassavetes and starring then kind of emerging new on the scene stars Ryan Gosling and Rachel McAdams. Ryan Gosling had, I think, a little bit more of a career than Rachel McAdams had. He was
Mickey Mouse Club.
Yeah. And then, of course, he had an important role on the pivotal Canadian teen dramedy Breaker High,
I know.
which is where we all know him from.
But of course, if we're going to talk about pivotal Canadian television programming, we also have to talk about Rachel McAdams' important role in the first season of Slings and Arrows, starring national treasure Paul Gross.
Great point. So they were both Canadian TV actors, but this is kind of their like Hollywood breakout. It's based on the 1996 novel by Nicholas Sparks of the same title. The novel made Sparks rich and famous.
It's bad.
Listen, we're going to talk more about Nicholas Sparks in a sec. But notably, it also made Gosling and McAdams kind of rich and famous. Like, it's sort of what turned them into movie stars in a real way. And their performances specifically were what people really, at the time, really loved about this movie. And I kind of think what makes it endure. The Notebook became an audience hit. And I specify audience here because critics didn't like it. I think a decent summary of the movie's cultural positioning is its Rotten Tomatoes score. It's got a 54% from critics and an 85% from audience. Vanessa, can you read this one-sentence critical consensus for us?
Quote, "It's hard not to admire its unabashed sentimentality, but The Notebook is too clumsily manipulative to rise above its melodramatic cliches." End quote.
This was really my starting point. I was like, ooh, melodramatic cliches. Let's talk more about melodramatic cliches. But I want to pause here and be like, what do you guys actually think about this movie?
I remember when Facebook was like pretty new. And when people were coming up with groups, it was like a cool thing to have groups. And a group that stood out to me very early on, which I just took for granted was ironic, was the Notebook Appreciation Society, because of the number of people and the type of people who I knew who were in that Facebook group. And I hadn't seen the movie, so I didn't know what they were talking about exactly. I just knew that The Notebook was this movie that people claimed to love, and I always assumed it was ironic until I had a conversation with a friend who was like, No,
Incorrect.
it's not ironic.
We love this movie.
It's the greatest movie I've ever seen. And I was like, you are a jock. Like how does not compute. I don't understand.
It contains the greatest sport of all, love.
Love and building a house.
3 great sports, love, house, war.
Okay, so I did eventually watch it, and I gotta say that the first time I tried to watch it, I was horrified and thought it was really, really terrible, and I didn't make it all the way through the movie. And then the second time I watched it all the way to the end and was like, this is the greatest movie I've ever seen.
Yeah. Jerk those tears. Do it.
I jerked my tears all over the place.
Vanessa?
I just want to say that I hate birds. I'm like glad birds exist, but I am not a fan of birds. And so that romantic moment where he takes her to the birds, I was like, this is a horror movie. Anyway, I just want to say that. I love this movie. I have loved this movie for a long time. I owned the DVD and would watch the deleted scenes. I think part of why I loved it is because I would skip the old people stuff, even though I love Gina Rollins and James Gardner, who, like, I've read his memoir. Like, I really love him. And watching it this time, I went on Twitter / my WhatsApp text exchange with Hannah McGregor and was, like, live texting her all of my thoughts. And I was like, no, Hannah, actually, this is a really good movie at first. And it is because the performances are so good.
Ryan Gosling and Rachel McAdams are so freaking good in this movie.
And James Marsden. And Joan Allen.
Yeah.
And Sam Shepard. But like those first scenes where they meet and you see her as being like scared of how attracted she is to him. And right, like really, like he makes her uncomfortable and she's intrigued and she's bored, but likes being in control. Right? Like, I guess I used to think that it was the writing, but it's just, right? Like, it's not good, but the acting is just incredible. And so I skate along the top of this movie just all the way. The 1940s stuff.
Yeah.
The 2000s stuff, I can't stand. I actually can't. I literally can't stand it. I fast forwarded it. What about you, Hannah?
I think, I come down in the same, like, I think these performances age great. Like, I think particularly that central love story, I just find so convincing. I think their chemistry is off the charts.
Yes.
Like, I just think that their performances are fabulous. And so it did take a moment for me of sort of stepping back from the immersiveness of those performances and the beauty, it's a beautifully costumed movie. It's a beautifully set decked movie. And so
except for the horror scene in the
the birds. I'm not afraid of birds.
Yeah.
So I like that part too. But so I kind of had to step back while working on this episode and be like, but what do I actually think about what's going on here?
Yeah.
Hey, you guys, I really don't want to interrupt because I am enjoying talking about our feelings and responses to this movie. But what do we think about a quick little plot summary? Huh?
You know what, Marcelle? I think that's a great idea. Hey, Vanessa, you do a lot of 30-second plot summaries on Harry Potter and the Sacred Text.
I do.
I think you could probably have more than 30 seconds for this one. It's a full movie.
I can do it in 30 seconds. I have my timer, coach. I got this.
All right. On your mark. Get set. Go.
So these two people are in an old age home, Allie and Duke is reading to her from a diary, and she has dementia and he has had heart attacks. Then we go back into the past and we're watching Noah and Allie fall in love many years ago. That's a summer romance. He's poor and works at some sort of like wood thing, and she's very rich and she's going to go to Sarah Lawrence, and her parents are very snobby. They fall very much in love. They have to break up because Joan Allen makes them. He goes off to World War II. She falls in love with James Marsden, gets engaged, and then she sees, I'm going way over. She sees in the newspaper that he built the house that he said that he was going to build her. And so she goes and sees him and they have an affair. And then James Marsden comes and is like, no, I still want to marry you. And she's like, I still want to marry you. But no, she doesn't. She goes and marries Noah. Thank God, true love reigns. And then it turns out, twist, that the old couple, Duke, is now what Noah gets called. And he is able, through the power of his love, to bring her back from dementia. And she reconnects with him, and then they die in each other's arms, and Christ saves them. At the exact same moment.
They die.
They die in each other's arms.
Wow. Incredible. Okay. So we've got all kinds of melodramatic plot points happening here, right? We've got like star-crossed lovers from opposite sides of the track. He's poor, she's rich. They can't be together. We've got like a beautiful young heroine forced to face hardship and heartbreak because of the unjust forces of society. We've got the most melodramatic thing of all, war. Classic melodrama.
Mm-hmm.
We've got the passionate reunion of lovers separated by forces beyond their control. And of course, this fantasy of a love so powerful, it can overcome not only class differences, but also literal Alzheimer's.
Yes. When you say it that way, this movie sounds bad. It's not bad.
Right? Like, I agree. It's not bad. But also, in classic Material Girls fashion, I think ultimately we're going to be less interested here in whether the movie itself is good or bad, and much more interested in what made it hit so hard in 2004. And we should probably start with talking a little bit more about Nicholas Sparks, because this is the movie that turned him into a celebrity. Hey, Marcelle, pop quiz.
Yeah, I'm here.
Did you know that Nicholas Sparks super sucks?
I actually didn't, but I can't wait to hear all about it. Tell me everything.
This guy sucks. Okay, Vanessa, you said you were going to do a little research into him. Do you have any fun Nicholas Sparks facts you'd like to share?
Nicholas Sparks. He is like such a successful author. 11 of his novels have been turned into movies. He's been a producer on some of these movies. He is a multi-millionaire and has really made his money off of his novels.
Okay.
A very rare thing. I know you guys talk about how rare that is a lot on the show, but he's become super rich, not just able to make a living. He went to Notre Dame on a track scholarship and injured himself. And he will proudly tell you he's in his 50s now. And in an interview I watched of him from just a few months ago, he will tell you that he's still a record holder on some race at Notre Dame.
Good for you, Nick.
Yeah. And so he injures himself and he's like just heartbroken. This, like, the world ended. And his mom was like, you got to do something to fill your time. And so he wrote a novel. And he became a novelist. He ended up working pharmaceutical sales, but he
All right, let's pause on that.
sold.
Before he became a successful novelist, he worked in pharmaceutical sales. Like a bad guy job.
Yeah.
It's a bad guy job. And also he talks about it now. Like, can you believe my genius could have been wasted on a sales job?
He also says if he wasn't going to be a novelist, he would have become a hedge fund manager, and that he would have been really good at that.
So the thing that I loved most about him is that right now he thinks that he is probably one of the world's best backgammon players, and is, even though he has never played competitively, is pretty sure that will one day, and that he will be the world champion. But most importantly, I think, is that he is a big investor and on the board of a school that he has started and is a part of education initiatives. And these are very Christian and pretend to be okay with LGBTQ plus populations, and at every turn have proven to not be. And so he is pretty like defensive about it, but is also on the books homophobic and has been sued for being prejudiced against an out gay professional at the school. And he's just like, man, one more famous thing about him is that he has a salad dressing recipe.
Chicken salad recipe.
A chicken salad recipe.
Grocer.
Where the salad dressing has 16 Splendas in it.
16 packets of Splenda in his chicken salad recipe.
What the fuck?
16 packets.
That's unhinged.
Listen, it's not the worst thing about him, but
it's not.
I feel like it's characteristic.
Right.
I just need to say, like, this is, we can call this a, like, mini segment of Material Girls, which is, like, Hannah hates a kind of guy.
Yeah.
Like, how much I fucking hate what's-his-face, the Lululemon guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chad or whatever his name is. His name's Chip Wilson. I hate him. Okay, but Sparks represents like a particular kind of guy that is, I think, my least favorite kind of guy.
Okay.
Which is a wealthy, straight, white, cis, able-bodied man who genuinely believes that his success is due to him working harder and being smarter than everybody else.
Yes.
And
Gotcha.
these guys, they're always like life hack and systems optimization guys. They're always like, I found a system. I found a system and my system's perfect. And if other people use my system, then they could also be successful. But people are too afraid to use my perfect system. And so that's why they're poor. Like, he's that kind of guy. When he describes how he comes up with the plots of his novels, it's like naked, remorseless ambition. Like, it's just what's universal. Like, okay, the last book that I did was about people in their 20s, so this one can't be about people in their 20s, so I guess this time they'll be in their 30s. What are women in their 30s worried about? Biological clock, probably. Okay, we got a woman who's worried about her biological clock. Like, this is the way this guy thinks. And that, coupled with the fact that he is actively disdainful towards romance as a genre and towards other romance novelists. He insists that he is not a romance novelist. He says he is writing dramatic love stories in the tradition of Hemingway and Shakespeare. Yeah. This guy sucks. He sucks.
Because I had read that, I'm not laughing, but Marcelle's laughing is getting to me.
That's fucking rich.
I would just like to be clear that if you met him at a cocktail party, he will talk to you about his running record at Notre Dame within 45 seconds.
And how good he is at backgammon. This guy, you would work so hard to avoid getting stuck in a conversation with this guy at a party. Like, I hate this kind of guy so much that I was tempted to make this entire episode about how much I hate this kind of guy. And then I was like, wait, that's not what this podcast is about. So we'll just save it for a bonus episode called Hannah Hates Kinds of Guys. But
oh, man.
I think it is, significant. His politics are significant here.
Yeah.
Longtime listeners know we distinguish between adaptations and source texts, and we often reject authorial intent as a way of understanding media. But I do think that we have to draw some line between Sparks' particular brand of white evangelical conservatism and the threads of melodramatic and nostalgic conservatism in this movie, because the early 2000s as an environment in American pop culture was a time of intense investment in both melodrama and nostalgia because of
9/11.
Yep, for sure. That's the one. So Elisabeth Robin Anker, in her book Orgies of Feeling, Melodrama and the Politics of Freedom, argues that...
Whoa. Hannah, not all of us have PhDs, and this sounds like theory. So I'm pretty sure that this is now a different segment, one in which I will speak less.
You know what? You're going to speak a lot, but you're right. It's time for the next segment. So this is The Theory We Need, the segment where we introduce some critical theory to help make sense of our topic. Specifically, we are going to be talking about melodrama. Now, where was I?
You were talking about Elisabeth Robin Anker's book. I believe it was called Orgies of Feeling, Melodrama and the Politics of Freedom. Does that sound right?
That's the one. Okay. Good job, Marcelle.
Oh, I'm really good at remembering.
Okay. In the introduction, Anker notes that, quote, the story of 9/11 is a melodrama, end quote.
Okay. What is a melodrama?
Vanessa, I'm so glad that you asked, because I have some ideas of what I think melodrama is, but I'm not 100% sure. Hannah, you listed some characteristics of what sound like melodramatic plots, right?
Yeah. Remember when I talked about like a virtuous young woman having to overcome social challenges? Those are melodramatic tropes.
Great. Let's hammer out a definition.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of why I think we collectively are struggling with a definition is because melodrama actually doesn't have a particularly clear definition. And we could, I think, get bogged down. Let's say, hypothetically, that I got pretty bogged down for a while learning about the history of how films are categorized as melodramas by different film theorists. But then I thought, that doesn't matter to us here. So for the purposes of our conversation today, I think we can just stick with Anker's definition. Vanessa, would you please read it for us?
Quote, melodramas convey stories about the suffering of virtuous people overcome by nefarious forces, and they examine political and social conflict through outsized representations of unjust persecution. Melodramas have had widespread influence in theater, literature, and cinema since the 19th century, from mass novels to silent films to action spectacles, from Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852 to The Birth of a Nation in 1915 to The Terminator in 1984. Linda Williams and Frederick Jameson even identify melodrama as the most popular form of American mass culture. Yet I argue that melodrama is more than a film, literary, or cultural genre. It is also a political genre. More precisely, a genre of national political discourse. End quote.
What I'm getting from the quote that Vanessa read for us is that a melodrama is a morally simplistic story where there's a good guy and a bad guy?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so I can see how and why that would be useful for doing a politics.
Uh-huh.
We're good, they're bad. That gets used to justify a lot of violence.
Precisely.
Okay.
Anker goes on to point out that the aspects of melodrama that evoke strong reactions in audiences that make us weep, for example, because melodramas have historically been referred to as weepies.
Gross.
Can also be used to, quote, evoke intense visceral responses and solicit affective states of astonishment, sorrow, and pathos, end quote, not only in audiences, but also in a citizenship.
So I keep thinking about sentimental stories and romantic stories and how they're often interested in, right, like the drawing room, right? The intimate, the personal, places where like Tolstoy doesn't write about, but which isn't totally true. But this melodramatic political discourse almost seems like the opposite of that. It's in the drawing room, but we're not caring about what's happening in the drawing room.
Yeah, we're caring about like the nation and the like global stage. So Anker talks about this too. Marcelle, could you read this quote for us? I think it nicely gets at Vanessa's point.
Quote, melodrama is often associated with intimate affairs, personal misfortune, and domestic problems within the home. And even scholars who have written most incisively about the political effects of melodrama primarily examine how it attends to social injustices within the nation and finds redress for them in intimate relationships, rather than in efforts to challenge injustice in more directly political ways.
Side note, she's talking about Lauren Berlant there and the concept of intimate publics. Go listen to our episode with Margaret H. Willison about Taylor Swift for more.
Yet, as a political discourse, melodrama operates in different registers. The suffering of U.S. subjects that it depicts appears to be caused by something outside the national body. An unjust injury wounds the entire nation, and this transforms melodrama to a more public, national, and state-centered register. End quote.
Okay, just to make sure I'm getting this. So melodramatic narratives often focus within the nation and within the domestic sphere and argue that intimate relationships can challenge injustice.
Yeah, exactly.
Ryan Gosling and Rachel McAdams falling in love. Take that, classism.
Take that, classism. Precisely. It's like, here's this huge structural problem. We can overcome it through the power of love. That's like sentimentality and intimate publics all over, right?
Totally. Okay. I get it.
But when applied to political discourse, at least in the post 9/11 context, melodramatic discourse becomes focused on threats that come from outside the nation that the nation needs to protect itself from.
Exactly.
That's interesting because the Notebook is really interested in the former kind of melodramatic narrative more than the latter, right?
Yeah, totally agree. And that disjunction, I think, is where we get to the really critically interesting stuff here. So I think there's sort of a low-hanging fruit reading of the Notebook in the context of 9/11. And that is essentially, this is a conservative time in history when melodramatic political discourses are drawing on a kind of like reactionary, nostalgic nationalism that constructs the US as innocent and pure and inherently good. And, beset by bad actors who are jealous of all of the freedom. And movies like The Notebook reinforce that cultural moment through this romanticization of the 1940s as a heyday of the ideal America, right? This is like the US participating in World War II is the beginning of the US becoming the sort of dominant imperial center as the sort of UK empire is like politically broken apart in the wake of World War II, right? So this is like the heyday of America, and it's represented through like white heterosexuals living in a refurbished plantation. So like, sure, that's a reading. It's a little pat, I think.
Yeah, and it doesn't really leave space for what people do with the movie, right? Or how the movie shows up in people's lives. Like we on the show often talk about reader response theory as a way of understanding that a piece of media or a text might seem on the surface to be, simply conservative, but actually it has a lot of subversive potential.
And that's exactly where Anker ends things in the conclusion of Orgies of Feeling, by asking about the subversive possibilities of melodrama. So rather than rejecting the genre altogether and just being like, it's bad and conservative and we simply need to throw it in the garbage, she's like, this is the primary mode of American popular culture. I was on Culture Study with Anne Helen Peterson talking about blockbusters because we were talking about Jurassic Park, by my book, Clever Girl. And we were talking about the fact that like blockbusters are almost always melodramas because this is just like the dominant form that American popular culture takes. And it's also one of the dominant forms of American political imagination. And that means that as much as it can be this really sort of conservative form, there's also this potential to take hold of it as a form. And she refers to re-narrativizing it, which is basically like retelling melodramatic stories in a different way to like get at a different understanding. So Anker particularly focuses on a subgenre of melodramatic films that she refers to as women's weepies, or, because we can all agree that that's actually a terrible phrase, she also calls them melodramas of failure.
Ooh.
And what distinguishes the melodrama of failure is that it has an unhappy ending.
Okay.
So whereas in the kind of melodramas that Anker aligns with post 9/11 discourse, it's like the heroic actions of a brave individual can overcome social forces that might have otherwise curtailed their freedom. The power of the individual can overcome anything. In melodramas of failure, individual sovereignty isn't actually a viable path to freedom.
I just want to say that Nicholas Sparks straight up thinks that his life is a melodrama. He thinks, I slightly tore my Achilles tendon when I was 19. And like a phoenix, I rose from the ash.
Yeah. I mean, Vanessa, it's such a good point. And the melodrama as a narrative form is, I think, deeply intertwined with like the American dream.
Right.
Bootstraps discourse.
Right. He's not like, I was still at Notre Dame and I was able to get my book into the hands of an agent without a problem. Right. Like none of that.
No, it's just like I was an innocent actor beset on all sides by the travails and injustices of the world. And I overcame them.
Which is that he
because
tripped.
I am powerful.
Right. Like,
yeah, he tripped.
Yeah, he tripped.
That's unjust.
It's really unjust.
Sorry, when you fall down,
how dare you?
That's God punching you. Vanessa, can you read this description of melodramas of failure for us?
Quote, the storylines of women's weepies center on the sacrifices demanded of the less privileged, primarily, but not exclusively women, and people inhabiting the lower economic strata by the strictures of American society. Yet rather than offering the solution typically found in more action-oriented melodramas, including melodramatic political discourse, the promise of heroically overcoming one's limitations, Women's weepies emphasize characters' lack of social agency and highlight in bold and pathos-laden gestures the sacrifices demanded of ordinary people to remain included in the normative social fold. These melodramas of failure unravel the very norms of unencumbered agency and conventional behavior desired by their characters. End quote.
Okay, I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to use the example that Anker uses, which is a movie from the 1950s that I've never seen called All That Heaven Allows. But as I'm describing All That Heaven Allows, I want you to be thinking about The Notebook.
Okay.
Okay. So All That Heaven Allows tells the story of a working class man who lives bravely according to his own values and moral code, doesn't care about what other people think about him, and he falls in love with a wealthy woman who is extremely concerned with what other people think about her and with the, societal expectations and norms of class and gender. So she wants to be with him, but when she decides to marry him, her wealthy family and her community shames her so entirely, basically says, like, you'll be an outcast, that she abandons her love in favor of staying in her lane. So in the conventional melodrama, Anker explains, the social unfreedom, right? She's made less free by these social structures, would be overcome by heroic individualism. So like the manly hero would save the heroine from social unfreedom through an act of personal sovereignty. He would be like, we can become free through love. Society can't control us. This marrying, this connection of sovereignty to freedom for Anker is key to understanding post 9/11 American politics. To become free, we must be sovereign. That is, we have to be the ones with the most power. We can't be free unless we are in charge, unless we are running everything.
Okay.
But All That Heaven Allows doesn't end like that. Marcelle, will you read us one final quotation, please?
Quote, "It is the failure of intimate and personal solutions to unfreedom, combined with the refusal to rehabilitate the promise of heroic individualism as the model of emancipation, that allows women's weepies, such as All That Heaven Allows, to delegitimate the normalized social hierarchies that contribute to unfreedom. It is also what will allow the film's refracted conventions to contribute a critical counterpoint to the conventions of post 9/11 melodrama." End quote. And I'm struggling, you guys. There are so many words and there are so many things to think about. And I'm having trouble balancing everything in my head.
Okay, I'm going to try to summarize.
Okay.
Good.
So melodramatic narratives can have happy endings or sad endings, but it's the happy endings that are aligned with melodramatic political discourses.
That's the like, I'm an individual and I can overcome all of the suffering.
Right.
Raw.
Yeah.
Okay.
I went to World War II and I'm a hero and I'm just as good as this rich man because I'm awesome. Right. So I'm going to get the girl.
Yeah.
Those kinds of discourses draw on melodramatic narrative tropes like brave individuals suffering from social injustices, like being poor, that must be overcome through acts of individual heroism, like rebuilding a plantation that the GI Bill can afford you.
Okay.
Because you fought in a war, which is brave.
Because you fought in a war, which is brave. Which in turn becomes very useful politically in terms of narratives in the wake of 9/11 that justify state violence in the service of freedom. A+ for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Perfect. Okay. So far, you're nailing it. What about the sad ones?
Okay. The sad ones, the ones with the sad endings, can potentially be read as a challenge to melodramatic political discourses, because they show that acts of individual bravery or of domestic intimacy can't fix social injustices. We can't love each other out of racism, which in turn delegitimizes a politics of melodrama that uses arguments for freedom as an excuse of acts of violence.
Okay. Can we just backtrack just a teeny little bit? I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. I need to go back to classic melodrama. talk to me about how this type of melodrama, where the brave individuals overcome social injustice through individual heroism, how does that get used to justify state violence in the service of freedom? I believe you, but I just need you to talk me through it.
Because those stories draw a link between freedom and sovereignty.
Okay.
So understanding what the difference is between freedom and sovereignty, I think, is really key here.
Mhm.
So freedom is the ability to like live a good life unshackled by external forces that would hold you down, right? So like
Mhm.
freedom is not being curtailed by class norms, gender norms, race norms, and being able to actually like pursue the things that you need or desire to have a good life. Sovereignty is power.
Mhm.
I think often it gets used like collapsed into freedom, like a sovereign state might be understood as like an independent state. But remember that like a sovereign is a ruler.
Yeah.
So sovereignty is about being the person who is in the position to enact power and make decisions.
Mhm.
So saying like, I'm not free unless I can violently enforce my sovereignty, my power, my individualism is the basis of a lot of these melodramatic narratives,
Okay.
right? That like a bad thing happens and the way that bad thing is going to be fixed is probably a man with a gun
Mm.
who's not held back by any kind of social norms or limitations, but who does what needs to be done.
Okay.
Right? And so those are the kinds of narratives that get taken up post 9/11 as the narrative framework for political discourse. That's basically like, we are an innocent nation beset by injustices that are outside of our power, right? Like, we didn't do anything to deserve this. You have to be, innocent. And our only possible response is an act of sovereignty, which is to take power over, in this case, the world.
Okay. So the narrative is used to justify state violence in the sense of we need to enact power in order to reclaim our sovereignty.
We need to use sovereignty to reclaim our freedom.
Okay.
Melodramas of failure still have people trying to reclaim their freedom. The point is that acts of sovereignty fail. That like a story in which an individual is beset by social forces outside of their control, in which they try to bravely overcome them through an individual act of power, force, heroism, and that doesn't work, that's a melodrama of failure.
And if The Notebook ended with Allie choosing Lon, it would be a melodrama of failure, right?
If The Notebook ended with Allie choosing Lon, it would be a melodrama of failure because it would have set us up with this fantasy of an individual being able to heroically overcome their circumstances. And then it would have been like, actually not, sorry, class one.
Right.
Yeah. So does that difference between melodramas of failure and like classical melodramas of 9/11 make sense?
Totally. But now I need us to get back to The Notebook because I want to know which one we're applying to The Notebook.
Yeah, really reasonable. And I'm going to answer you in the form of a thesis.
Final segment. In this one, we get to watch Hannah bring together the history of our object of study and our theoretical framework to articulate a thesis statement that we'll then write 365 unanswered letters about.
Thank you. That's the only way in which I will accept a response to this thesis.
Devastating.
Ahem. The 2004 film The Notebook received exactly the critical treatment you'd expect from an unabashedly melodramatic weepy, a sentimental love story designed to tug on viewers' heartstrings. And while it remained a fan favorite for years, more recent revelations about how much Nicholas Sparks sucks have soured its sentimental appeal for many viewers. The broad outlines of the narrative are undeniably conservative, aligning with a post-9/11 moment in American pop culture, characterized by a kind of sentimental nostalgia for the heyday of American greatness, and values like working hard, fighting in the Second World War, being straight and white, and hanging out in plantations like that isn't a total fucking nightmare. People love doing that in the early 2000s. From this perspective, The Notebook aligns with what scholar Elisabeth Robin Anker identifies as the melodramatic political discourse that dominated in the wake of 9/11. But Anker is less hasty than film critics to simply reject melodrama. She recognizes the melodrama's political and cultural centrality in the American imagination, and ultimately argues that melodramas of failure might offer a counterpoint to jingoistic political language by undermining the link between sovereignty and freedom. The question, then, is whether we might read The Notebook as a melodrama of failure or a women's weepy. A question that demands a little more attention to narrative than we usually like to pay. In this essay, I will...
Okay, but they end up together, though, is the thing.
Yeah,
so,
for
like,
sure she
how
chooses Noah.
melodrama of failure, but they end up together. So, why... Is it Alzheimer's?
Kind of,
Okay.
yeah. So the thing I kept thinking about is the scene that Anker talks about as being like one of the paradigmatic scenes of melodramas of failure is what happens at the end of All That Heaven Allows, which is that the heroic male figure gets in an accident and is permanently disabled. And the final scene is like him lying on a couch and her standing over him, like she is now going to have to take care of him. And that the sort of failure of melodrama in that moment is like, you can't actually willpower your way to freedom, right? That model of sovereignty where you just exert enough willpower that eventually you remake the world in the shape you want it to be isn't how the world works. Because sometimes, Nicholas Sparks, you fall down.
Sometimes you're running too fast.
Sometimes you have a widowed whip.
So that really reminded me, as I was reading it, of the frame narrative, right? That we've got this sort of central romance that ends happily, but the framing narrative is about aging and mental and bodily deterioration and death. And like, Noah's thing is that he bought this big house, like he was so poor, but he bought this big house and he, through sheer hard work, rebuilt the entire fucking thing the way she wanted
including art supplies. It's a little creepy.
With art supplies.
Creepy.
Like a whole art gallery for her, and she sees that and she's moved, not scared, like I would be.
Me too.
Like,
I mean, you know what? There are I would let Ryan Gosling do a lot of things.
Okay, fair enough. I would too.
No, yeah.
Not
fair.
show me those
Actually,
birds, though.
Fair. And they've just had really good sex, so it's like, I get it. But like, you know, for him, his success is totally this narrative of sovereignty, right? Like he buys and fixes this house, but in the end, they're not in that house. They don't die in that house. His love leads him to an assisted living facility that limits his sovereignty in a real way in pursuit of the thing that actually makes him most free, which is his fundamental interdependence with Allie.
So watching it this time, I was like, oh, Nicholas Sparks, you're actually accidentally making a liberal point about social equity that was able to happen in a minute, which is that Ryan Gosling comes home from World War II. And first of all, I just learned something about World War II, which is that once you went, you didn't come back. There wasn't like a term. Like in Vietnam, you went for 9 to 12 months. In World War II, you went in 1941 and you came back when the war was over.
Or when you were too injured to fight anymore.
That or dead.
Like James
exactly.
Marsden. in a full body
right.
cast.
But like, I had never thought about it. And I was just like, oh my God, you were just like there forever. Okay.
Yeah.
But he comes back, and his dad, played by Sam Shepard, which is really interesting because he's this like very individualistic, yet interested in social support networks playwright from the 20th century. But he comes back, and his dad is like, I sold the house so that you, with your GI Bill money, can buy the plantation and rebuild it. And so it is only with money from the New Deal that Ryan Gosling can afford this house. And so like millennials with their hard work would not be able to do this.
No.
Because, right? Like there's no veteran coming back from Iraq who's like, now that I've fought for American sovereignty, I can buy a house.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's just none of that. And he does need intergenerational wealth, right? Like his dad owned property and sold the house.
That's right.
And like, it's very sweet where the dad's like, and now I'm going to live with you because I sold everything I own in order to make this happen for you.
And like the combination of your GI Bill and us selling our family home was just enough to buy an unlivable ruin.
Yeah. Like where are they living in between? They're camping.
I think they're camping.
Yeah. They are functionally homeless.
There is a little wink to a social safety net
exactly.
there, huh?
That Nicholas Sparks absolutely does not think is a social safety net. He's like, the greatest generation deserved this.
It's a reward for bravery.
Right, because it was everybody going, right? Like it was white, handsome men like Ryan Gosling going, and therefore it wasn't a social safety net. It was entitlement.
Yeah.
Right.
And because World War II holds a distinct role in the American imagination from other wars, right? Like it's the war where the U.S. stepped up and saved democracy for the globe and then took, because like before that, the U.S. was kind of politically isolationist. And then it's like, well, Europe can't get their shit together, so I guess we'll come and save freedom. And then I guess we have to run the entire world now because none of the rest of you can be trusted with freedom. So, okay, I guess we'll build a global empire, twist our arm.
That's exactly what we sound like.
Yeah, sorry. That's all of America. Fine.
I'm tired.
Marcelle, what do you think? Do you think this is a melodrama of failure or not?
I'm convinced. I hear what you're saying. This all makes sense to me. I would love to pivot just a teeny little bit if I can, because I have a long-standing theory in my head about this movie. I never read the book.
Ooh, a cheeky little theory.
A cheeky little theory. I'm really interested in what the two of you think of this theory in light of this idea of melodrama of failure and, in particular, this period of American nostalgia. When I watched The Notebook for the first time, I was like, wow, that's just The Great Gatsby, but with a happy ending.
I had the same thought.
Okay, and so I want to talk about this because The Great Gatsby is written in the 20s, right? It is pre-World War II, right?
Yes.
And F. Scott Fitzgerald has Jay Gatsby accumulate his wealth, and it's a whole commentary about how new money is insufficient for old money.
And only ill-gotten, right?
And only ill-gotten. Yeah. And so, but now with The Notebook, which is written, again, in a totally different time period, right? Written in the 90s, and then the film adaptation is in the early 2000s. But in this story, new money and old money, these are no longer constraints that we see as legitimate. We can recognize that class difference is bad and wrong, and that we can overcome with our love and our hard work. I'm just really interested, one, if my theory is correct, that this is just The Great Gatsby, but with a happy ending, even though it's actually not a happy ending, because that would be a melodrama of success rather than a melodrama of failure.
I also think about this with so many romance novels, Marcelle, that romance novels written in the 90s and later are House of Mirth, which was written in 1905, but with a happy ending, right? It's like everything bad happens to her. She doesn't have a chance in the world, and a personal relationship saves her, versus in 1905, everything bad happens to her. And even though she's really well connected interpersonally because she doesn't have what she like needs materially, spoiler everybody, she like dies alone and cold, right?
Yeah. And like part of what you're identifying is like romance is a form of melodrama often. Romance novels are a form of melodrama with a guarantee that they end happily. Contemporary romance novels, I think, really resist the trope of like, in order for this ending to be happy, it's because a man needs to show up with a weapon and be really brave. Right? Like that's the sort of feminist turn in romance novels that is like, but what if a woman had an autonomy?
Just one autonomy.
Just one autonomy. Okay, can I just bring us back briefly to Alzheimer's?
Yes.
To the conclusion of this book, right? And this question of whose sovereignty wins out in the end. Because on one hand, there's this sense that like Noah has to give up his sovereignty, right? Like as represented by his house and his hard work and his accomplishments and his successful marriage and all of their kids, right? He's like turned into this patriarch. They call him Duke now, inexplicably. All of the pictures from his past, he's fucking James Gardner now in the past, inexplicably. But, you know, they die in each other's arms.
With her aware again, right?
With her aware again.
She is not in a state of dementia when they die in each other's arms.
Right.
So how do we read this ending?
I think it's supposed to be deeply Christian, right? It is like, if you love each other enough. I find this ending so offensive. My parents were married for 49 years when my he has normal pressure hydrocephalus, which is causes dementia. And they've now been married for 53 years. And for the last 4 years, my mom has been married to a stranger, right? Like he is just not the same person. And so this idea that you can call someone back from that, from like,
yeah, it's really horrifying.
It's disgusting. And I know that there are moments of clarity in different forms of like, right, like different forms of dementia, there can be moments of clarity, but the way this is like a form of torture.
Still this like, if you try hard enough.
Yes. And I think that it is just like this deeply Christian, like they're going to now go to heaven together, right? Like, and I joke that this is how I want to die with my dog, with us at the exact same moment with us in each other's arms.
Uh-oh. Well, Vanessa, it's been nice knowing you.
Roy's going to live forever. I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Sorry.
Roy and I are going to die in our 80s together, Hannah.
That's really cute.
So do you guys think that it is accurate to suggest that the book/film is exploiting the fears and anxieties about dementia and Alzheimer's in particular in this way that like feeds into this narrative of if you just work hard enough and if you just try hard enough and if you just love each other purely enough, then you can at the very least be together at the very end and then be together in theory forever, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, and this hat tip to Coach, I want to give them credit for this point, but the ultimate sovereign is God.
I mean, she becomes a bird, right? At the end. Those are the last shots. So at the beginning of the movie, she says
she doesn't sorry. She doesn't literally become a bird. That last shot is metaphorical.
Sorry. That is in metaphor. In the
Marcelle just had this like face like
I don't remember
sorry, what?
So this reincarnation?
Importantly, very similar final shot to Jurassic Park. Just need to point that out. Really similar.
Like a third of the way through the movie when Noah and Allie are like the height of their being in love, she says, "Do you think I could be a bird in a past life?" And she says, "Say I'm a bird." He says, "If you're a bird, I'm a bird."
You're a bird, I'm a bird.
And then he takes her to see the birds in the horror scene in the middle of the movie. And then at the beginning and end, we get these shots of like birds taking flight.
Yeah. Those are their immortal souls.
Those are their immortal souls, exactly.
Yeah. And, right, this is the tricky thing about like, is sovereignty ultimately undermined in the end by him having to like give up his home and his role as a patriarch in order to be with her? Or are we actually seeing the hand of the unassailable sovereign
the Lord.
God. Because that idea, right, the principle of the Christian God's ultimate sovereignty also underpins a lot of post 9/11 violence.
Right.
Well, did we ruin the Notebook for you? Listen, Ryan Gosling's still hot. You can't take that away from us.
Just fast forward through the old people stuff. Go watch James Gardner in any number of weird movies with Doris Day from the 1960s.
Also hot?
He was so hot. He was confusingly hot. A touch of mink. So hot. Go watch that.
Don't say a touch of mink to me in my home.
Saying.
Material Girls is a Witch Please production and is distributed by Acast. You can check out awitchplease.ca for our episodes, transcripts, reading lists, and merch. And if you don't, we'll probably jump off a Ferris wheel about it.
Sorry.
But if you agree to go on a date with us, then maybe we can check out our other shows together. Gender Playground, a podcast about the joys of gender-affirming care for kids, and Making Worlds, a video podcast about sci-fi, fantasy, and the radical power of imagining otherwise.
Looking for more ways to prove your undying love? Subscribe to our excellent newsletter at ohwitchplease.substack.com.
Already do.
Oh, good. Thank goodness. And our even better Patreon at patreon.com/ohwitchplease.
I do.
Good job. Be like Vanessa.
Yeah.
You can also find us on Instagram and Threads at ohwitchplease and on TikTok at ohwitchpleasepod. Vanessa, where can people find out more about you and your work?
Well, they should listen to our podcast, Hannah, Hot and Bothered, where we talk about love stories, and they can listen to our new show, Let's Ask Taylor Swift, in which we are looking closely at the lyrics of the songs of Taylor Swift. So those are two podcasts where you can hear more of me and more of Hannah.
Yay. Only on one of them. I'm not on the Taylor Swift podcast.
We'll probably make you come on at some point.
Yeah.
Both of you. It's a threat.
Threat accepted.
Thanks, as always, to Auto Syndicate for the use of our theme song, Shopping Mall. And, of course, thanks to the whole Witch Please Productions team, our digital content coordinator, Gabby Iori, our social media manager and marketing designer, Zoe Mix, and our executive producer, Hannah Rehack, a.k.a. Coach.
Whoop.
At the end of every episode, we will thank everyone who has joined our Patreon or boosted their tier to help make our work possible. Patreon support is the way we pay our incredible team. So when we say, if you're a bird, I'm a bird, we really mean it. Our enormous gratitude goes out to these birds of a feather, Kelly P. and Madison.
Both birds. We'll be back next episode with a material concerns episode, so get your questions ready so we can answer them. But until then,
see you later, melodramators. Later, weepers. I can't say that word.